Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review American Gods Season 2, Episode 3 and 4. So, I hope I'm going to get all this accurate because there's a lot of stuff going on in this one. But when looking at it, there's some stuff that I could deem is not exactly, positive in my mind. But when looking at it, I still like the story overall. It's just there's a lot of just adding and adding and adding just for the sake of adding. There's a lot of just like, okay, let's bring all this in, let's bring all this stuff in here, let's bring all these, every single episode has to have a new god in it, and that we have to talk about in this one. Not a new god, but you know what I mean. There's a new character that they have to introduce. And they're even doing even more new characters because they're taking old characters and now changing them because reasons. Because cutting of budget, I'm sure, for this show. Immediately that comes to mind when I saw this old person being changed because I'm like, oh, cutting of budget? Okay. So going into here, I was just like, what are we doing with like where is this show really going? When are we going to get to the point of this show? Is it just going to continue to get like trickled and milked out? Like, I don't know. It's just that's the frustration I'm kind of getting to of just like, okay, it seems like we're going backwards a little bit. It seems like we're going like especially with these two episodes, it feels like we're going backwards just so we can like kind of go back into being like it feels like we're like, hey guys, you know all these characters that you know of. Well, goodbye to any of those people because we're gonna go to a whole nother level. We're gonna go to a whole different wing of American Gods because we still need story to tell. Because we still need to push all this stuff up to the forefront, and so we just got a lot of stuff to do. And I'm like, but do you really? Because, yeah. Anyways, so going into this, I ultimately would question like, what was the importance of having Shadow Moon, having the journey of which that he has in these episodes? It just kind of feels that if you're probably showcasing yet another god or some other character that's going to be used later on, which I will probably completely forget about, great. But because ultimately when that person shows up again, I'm gonna be like, who is this person? Oh yeah, she was that girl that ultimately was from that thing, and she did that. Oh, okay. I don't know who that is still, but okay, whoever she is. Um, but yeah, I got a little bit of frustration with just the repetitious like, oh, am I gonna need to know who this person is? Oh, am I gonna need to know who that person is? Maybe. Oh, well, that's great. It's just, ah, it's like a big old when you're like, am I gonna have to search the web for every little person that ends up getting like one lick of anything that comes into here? Like, am I gonna have to figure out who that is? I'm so confused. In the importance of the grand scheme of things. But I guess it is what it is. So, going on into here, uh, I'm a little bit frustrated, but when looking at it, like, I'm still enjoying the show. I'm still enjoying the story. And but again, the overall opinion that I have is I feel like we're going backwards. We're going backwards just to tell more story, and that's irritating. Um, really. So let's just ultimately break these episodes down because I'm sure there's a lot to go over, mow over, and whatever. Um, I just felt like these episodes were just kind of like especially like the Easter one that we just had, and now just kind of moving on. I'm like, what are the points of these episodes? All of them. What is the point of showcasing a person in these episodes? Just showcase them? That's annoying. It's great to just eat time and just utterly just like, oh hey, here's a cool thing that we can do, but I'm just like, yeah, but there needs to be more than that. There needs to be like substance in it, and if it's just like, well, enjoy the ride, then I guess I can take that in and just say, well, I guess I can just enjoy the ride of whatever the heck this is. But when I'm trying also to figure out who everyone is, and they keep plopping out people that are just gonna waste my time, then ultimately it's just like, oh well, it's great that I had to take the time to figure out who this person was just for them to end up just being irrelevant past one episode. And I'm like, and I feel like I need to learn other people that uh, that will probably get showcased back around again in this episode or in this show, and I'm just like, when is the battle gonna happen? When is the fight gonna happen? So that way we can just kill off a lot of people. So we can just go back to just having it be Shadow Moon. Good God, can we just kill everybody off in the next episode after this? So that way we can just have fewer people that we have to care about and invest in and know who they all are. Because I need to know who all these people are. And if you can just easily kill them off for me, that would be great. Kill a ton of them off. So I could just have to just be like focal pointed on like the very fewest of people. I think a war should just come down to like two people. That would be great. It doesn't need to have 20 people into this war, or it doesn't need to have 50 different gods all in this war that maybe they're going to choose a side. Maybe. Good God. Let's go into spoilers. Let's go into that double five, because otherwise. It's just getting exhausting. It's getting exhausting. It is. But if anything, I'm liking, like, I guess, yeah, it's enjoying the ride is what it all comes down to. So I guess I just have to enjoy the ride. But this whole like war thing is just like, it's a lot of build. It's a lot of build up. How long is it gonna take? Like 5 seasons to build this war up, and then they're finally gonna have the war, and then it's like the war is gonna like be done in like 2 seconds, and then ultimately it's like, yeah, we had that war, but I bet what's gonna happen when they finally have this war that they've been building up for so long, I bet the entire war is gonna be a war that's completely done off camera, and you're just going to see the eventual resolution of it all, or the finishing up of it all, and you're gonna see this entire war off camera, and I'm just gonna be like, wow, that's deflating. But I don't know. I don't know if the war has already happened within this season, or if it starts in season 3 or whatever. But this thing is just taking forever. Like, really. At this point, I thought like I'm just kind of, I just thought like, okay, probably by episode 4, like we're gonna get to like, okay, now the war begins, and then like the second half of this season was going to be the war, and then like the third season was just going to be uh like, okay, this is the aftermath of the war, and so person won, and this is where Shadow Moon is in between all of this, unless there is a difference of oh crap, this happened with so person or peoples or whatever. So let's get into spoilers. Let's talk about all the new interesting stuff, or the times of which that we have to just groan about some of these episodes. So let's go. Excuse me. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. So first off, we have to break down and ultimately mention the old new character. So we have a character in this episode that ultimately has to premiere called New Media. I'm not going to call her that because that's what IMDb says her character is. I'm calling her Social Media. I'm going to call her Social Media. I think that works much better. So we have a character named Social Media, which, or what I'm dubbing Social Media, who clearly can't act, clearly. So that's great. Has no acting skills whatsoever, and I'm just have to just buy a character that has to speak through you through emojis and texts, and I'm supposed to be fine with that. Really? So in other words, this character has one costume, and whereas media before had like plenty of costumes, like the Marilyn Monroe uh, and the seemingly Davy Bowie and all kinds of other stuff, like all those costumes and all the I Love Lucy and all that kind of interesting stuff. That was fun. That was great. What is this media gonna do? Oh, they're just animated looking. They're just really animated. They just have one costume, but it looks really fun, right? Sure. This social media is already tying themselves onto to Technical Boy, and I'm like, oh my god. So in other words, like this person is riding the coattails off of a person that has been on this show for a while, and because they themselves have no real value, that they have to ride the coattails of another actor that has been on here longer. Wow, that feels like a boatload of suck. That feels like a boatload of suck going on right now. But anyways, so let's just get into the describing of this episode number Trace. So number Trace. If anything, let's go into the opening. So we ultimately have it to where tail ending of what I forgot about. We ultimately have it to where Mr. Wednesday ultimately takes his car and puts it in front of the train tracks to ultimately have Shadow Moon's tortured train ultimately derailed, leaving it to where Shadow Moon and Laura are all just kind of just fluffed off to the destruction of this train. It seems that Laura is all in pieces, and Shadow Moon is just kind of in his bizarrish device still, which he's just kind of stuck in this train, but ultimately will get out later on. We have it to where Mr. Wednesday and the Leprechaun ultimately grab the pieces of Laura and ultimately drive off, leaving Shadow Moon to just fend for himself. We ultimately have it to where Laura is pieced back together by Ibris, and ultimately we have Bilquis, Ibris, and Mr. Nancy eventually talking about which side they're going to be on, which I thought that this whole dialogue here was fascinating. I thought reasonably, one, Mr. Nancy buttering Bilquis up was like, if he wasn't doing that already, like to see that again was kind of interesting. And ultimately to have Mr. Nancy talking about them being like African gods of sorts, and so reasonably like they need to choose a side together kind of thing. And I thought that that was kind of interesting, because ultimately we had Mr. World coming to Bilquist, ultimately like saying like it seems like Bilquist is being a little bit too neutral, and so eventually she needs to choose a side. And so reasonably, while that interesting dialogue is going on, which I ultimately will kind of skip around about because it's just a lot of stuff that I kind of am kind of uncomfortable all mentioning with the whole Mr. Nancy talking, and it was really fascinating, but really I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to sound insensitive. So we'll skip that because ultimately there might be some stuff there that I don't want to get into. But we ultimately have it uh, to where Shadow Moon is driving his way to Cairo, ultimately to seemingly still be in good spirits, to be talking to some uh, gas station attendant and talking about uh, getting paid in a smile and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, like Shadow Moon is so optimistic and so like it's so weird. Like I thought the whole like his good spirits was just him being around Easter, but like he's so like he's kind of cringe now. He's a little cringe when ultimately he's kind of just being around people, and he's so like happy and happy go lucky and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm like I like it, but again, I'm also just I'm like it's kind of weird to keep floating this a whole like he's in good spirits like consistently. Uh, but eventually we have it to where we have Shadow Moon ultimately getting hitching a ride because he's homeless, but ultimately he doesn't like want to say that he's homeless. He's just mentioning that he just took a jog over. Uh, he just took a jog, and ultimately just he ended up getting injured along the way. So we have it to where Shadow Moon is going on a road trip. So while that is going on, Laura is getting stitched up by Ibris, and ultimately we find out that it seems like she's getting to have maggots in her body. Ultimately, at some point we have Laura who is just barfing up maggots, and that's gross. So we have it to where uh, we have it to where Mr. Wednesday is going to try and help Laura, help her into recharging her lucky coin. But Leprechaun is ultimately talking about uh, that she needs to go to New Orleans instead. And so reasonably we have it to where Laura is just like, you know what, like I've tried your plan, Leprechaun, and it didn't work. So if anything, like I'm gonna go with somebody new. I'm gonna go with Mr. Wednesday. And ultimately Leprechaun is like that's a mistake, dead wife. It's like if anything, like you're just gonna ultimately head to New Orleans anyways. And so Laura ends up going with Mr. Wednesday to ultimately go and sacrifice a thing of cattle uh, or some god of some woman of sorts. So ultimately, this cattle changes into a woman, and I'm not sure what the heck that even was. And so this cow woman, cattle woman, gets sacrificed to ultimately unveil um, this small little knife. And so we have Mr. Wednesday that is saying, "Hey, we are going to head to Argus." This guy that is the all-seeing eye, which they talk about. because this guy has eyes all around everywhere. He's an old god, and so reasonably we have it to where also social media and Technical Boy are heading to see Argus as well, because ultimately, new media wants to reach even further than what she has. She's ultimately talking about broadband and stuff like that to ultimately just get a little bit further, and so reasonably, Technical Boy is going to take social media to Argus. So we have it to where new media is ultimately talking or seemingly talking to Argus, and it seems that ultimately uh, new media is talking about the connection that they could possibly have together, Argus and new media, and we have Technical Boy that's just kind of in the background, just going like, "You guys are weird." Like, you guys are weird. Because reasonably, we have it to where Argus ultimately takes his power cord and shoves it up New Media's gooch. To ultimately, they are seemingly having a good time. So while pleasure is going on between the two of Argus and New Media, and Technical Boy is just like, yeah, are we gonna like stop this anytime soon? Are we gonna just, yeah? Is this just like so? We have a tour. Mr. Wednesday and Laura are making their way to Argus to charge up again Laura's lucky coin to let her live a little bit longer, and so we have it to where Laura makes her way to Argus and just quickly sticks the little knife into his neck to ultimately Technical Boy wanted this whole thing to be resolved anyways, and once he saw Laura coming, he thought that he should step in and say something. But when Laura was going to kill Argus anyways, Technical Boy was like, "Nah, I don't care, kill him." Because ultimately, it's just Argus was kind of a neutral party that was kind of benefiting uh, both sides, and so eventually taking this character out just made it much easier uh, for the new gods to ultimately just like, well, this guy had old technology that we're just gonna try to make new, and this and that. So we have it to where in this journey of Shadow Moon, while he's talking to this girl that ultimately he is hitchhiking from, or hitchhiking with, she is taking Polaroids, and I'm just like, okay, what is the Polaroids thing? Is there like a secret meaning behind that? But it seems like this girl is taking Polaroids, and she is like making fun of Shadow Moon, ultimately like showcasing that he was sleeping and like writing Z's on his photo, and so Shadow Moon is talking to this girl, and ultimately she is talking about a like two spirits or something like that, which I didn't quite understand. I was trying to figure out what the heck she was even talking about. It seemed like um, she had some like horned tattoo, like a horned animal on her shoulder or on her arm, and I was like, okay, so there's got to be some significance to that. It's got to be some, like, I'm assuming quite possibly a Native American god of sorts. Don't have any clue what exactly that is, and I could be absolutely wrong. But when that symbol normally comes up to me, I immediately think like maybe it's a quite possibly a Native American god, but I could be completely wrong. But ultimately, it's talking just about dual spirits and stuff like that, and that's what she was talking about. I was like, what the heck does this even mean? Uh, we have it to where Shadow Moon is asking her, it's like, well, hey, are you a god? And ultimately she's like, well, it's like, but yeah, so we ultimately have it to where Shadow Moon eventually makes it to Cairo, and ultimately that is to lick his wounds or ultimately get his wounds ultimately taken care of. So ultimately, after the end game of Argus, we have eventually Mr. Wednesday uh, making his route to get back to Shadow Moon, and we ultimately have it to where seemingly I would assess that Laura is going to make her way to New Orleans. So we ultimately have it into the very next episode. We ultimately have it to where there is seemingly a boy that kind of becomes a super genius of sorts. Ultimately, his father is ultimately talking about Bach and stuff like that, and music and everything like that. And this boy who becomes this CEO of some company ultimately takes music and translates it in a different way. Uh, by using, I think, binary code, like uh, using it into like code, like deciphering it in a completely different way, and then retranslating it back into music somehow. Which I, yeah, good luck for me trying to understand any of that garbage. But so we have this kid who eventually is at some funeral, and they are playing this transcribed Bach music, and ultimately that because this guy had risen to such a huge technical status, he eventually can see the god of technology, which ultimately is technical boy. So we have it to where ultimately this episode is to go into Mr. Wednesday and Shadow Moon going to St. Louis. So they're going to St. Louis to meet the god of money, which ultimately I didn't know who that was. But ultimately I'm just like, yeah, god of money. So we ultimately have Louis or St. Louis. We ultimately have Mr. Wednesday and Shadow Moon heading to St. Louis, and they are to meet at a like a Hotel America or something. And we find out that Mama G is working there. I'm like, oh, okay, so now I know who this character is because when looking at it, I'm like, okay, it seemed like she was an Indian god of sorts. And so I'm trying to figure out who this person's name was, and it was Mama G. And it seems like she is a part of the old gods, and ultimately it seems like she works at every single branch of one of these uh, uh, American whatever places that they're at, Hotel America or whatever it is. It seems like she's at every single store. So I guess she like can work and do everything. So we have it to where Shadow Moon is ultimately meeting Mama G and is like, hey, like you work here too? And she's like, yeah, I work everywhere. Like, of course, because like she's a entrepreneur and she like just uh, tries to make as much profit as she humanly can, because why wouldn't she? So Mr. Wednesday is kind of reflecting on Mama G's past, to ultimately kind of give us a reference of what she has accomplished. And so we have it to where Shadow Moon is trying to understand why exactly that like they have to come and get this god of money. Like what is the real true importance of money in a God scale? It's like, well, Mr. Wednesday has to spell it out of like, well, if you have this salt shaker, like, I'm going to give you a piece of paper for this salt shaker. And ultimately, giving you this piece of paper, it has a story on it. And ultimately, this story is valuable. And so, reasonably, that's worth exchanging like a salt shaker for a piece of paper. And so reasonably, they also mentioned that uh, that like of course like wars cost money, and so ultimately having like the god of money on their side ultimately is a big get. So here's the interesting thing. You ultimately have it to where Shadow Moon is ultimately asking Mr. Wednesday, why him? And so we have it to where Mr. Wednesday is, of course, giving the reason uh, that he had given to someone before, where I think it was maybe Laura, or why the reason why Laura was killed was simply because Shadow Moon needed to have nothing to live for, and so that's why Mr. Wednesday could easily have made that deal with him in episode 1. So, or the early episodes of season 1. So we have it to where yeah, Shadow Moon asks why, and ultimately, Mr. Wednesday ultimately says that it's like, well, like I need you to have nothing uh, to to be in the way of me, uh, like getting you to work with me. Like basically, you had nothing to live for. You had nothing. You had no one. You had nobody. Like not a cent to your name, and this and that. And so like I like it was pretty much made so to where Shadow Moon was going to work with Wednesday even before this whole wars even started. Like uh, really, Shadow Moon was the first chess move out of everything, and I think that's why Shadow Moon is really asking Mr. Wednesday why him more than anything else. Uh, it seems that ultimately we have we have it to where Shadow Moon is like, you know what? I think there is something more valuable to me than you're letting on. But hey, like I'll just keep going on. I'll just keep going with this. I'll just be the spoke on the wheel and we'll just see where this goes. But like I think there is more value to me than you're really letting on, and I'm just telling you that now. Um so we move on and we ultimately have these three Girl Scout cookie people appear. And they're ultimately asking if they if if and when Mr. Wednesday approaches them that, oh, do you have credit? Do you have this? Do you have money? Do you have whatever? And so reasonably we have Mr. Wednesday say, yes, I have money. And so they're like, oh, okay. Because ultimately Mr. Wednesday likes people to be able to have some kind of money history or have money on them or be able to uh, just be able to have a history of spending money at sorts. We have it to where Shadow Moon doesn't have a line of credit, doesn't even have, I guess, uh, his name isn't even the right name on his birth certificate. So this guy could have a completely different name and we don't know about it, or we won't know about it until later what his actual name is. So like Shadow Moon is basically the equivalent of Baby Yoda right now. That so ultimately Shadow Moon is not actually legitimately Shadow Moon. He could be a completely different person, and we don't know. So I'm assuming. Here's what I think is gonna f up a lot of things and probably happen. Because I'm assessing whether or not like how long Shadow Moon is gonna be on this show. Sadly enough, is that I'm wondering if that's gonna be the big change. I hope not. I've really invested in Shadow Moon. I've liked Shadow Moon. Um, ultimately, oh, I forgot about. Uh, yeah, Shadow Moon ultimately had been had sleeped around with I think Zoria in his dreams again. Ultimately, to get licked his wounds. To ultimately Shadow Moon ultimately was trying to not get with that girl, but ultimately the girl was just pushing himself on him, and to ultimately he's just like, well, F it, like, like if anything, just like nah, whatever. Ultimately, at first he was kind of like not talk or not wanting to get with this girl because ultimately he's like, dude, Laura would kill you if she found out that you were with me. Um, but anyways, uh, that ultimately when Shadow Moon got up, that's when ultimately Mr. Wednesday was ultimately just like, hey, like how is your life going? Like, is somebody lick your wounds and this and that, and that's when they head out to St. Louis. So, but yeah, evidently, so Shadow Moon doesn't even have his like that is not his actual name that is on his birth certificate. So I'm like, so is it going to be that we're going to find out that Shadow Moon is a completely different person at some point, and it's going to be like new media all over again, where it's like, oh yeah, well, Shadow Moon is actually this person, and this person is that god, and that's so. Are we going to eventually switch over to a different main character? Is what I'm assessing might quite possibly happen, or is something worse going to happen? And I'm just going to be just like really. Uh, so I don't know. We'll take it with what it comes because when looking at it, I'm like, are we? Because I think there was a reason why we got a flashback of Shadow Moon. Like, are we just gonna get a younger Shadow Moon at some? I'm 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 questioning everything now. I have to question everything. Because I'm assuming that Shadow Moon is actually some god, and eventually we're gonna find out that he's so and so person actually that he's just been going under the name of Shadow Moon, but there's a real legitimate name that ultimately we're just gonna be like, oh my god, he's that person, wow, and then we're just gonna like he's gonna go under that real legitimate name the entire time. And I'm like, oh wow, okay. So, like, there has to be a reason why they said that Shadow Moon isn't actually his real name. There has to be a reason for that. But I don't know what that is until eventually we'll get to there. So, moving on. So, but I'm just like are they gonna like what other garbage are they gonna change in this show? What are they gonna change? Stop changing things. Stop it. Because ultimately we have to where uh, technical boy, uh, and I'll get back to the god of money thing. Technical boy is eventually going into seeing this CEO and ultimately talking about that Argus is now dead and they're going to take everything from Argus and ultimately they're ultimately going to try and use his technology as well as with Technical Boy's new medias and ultimately fuse it all together um, to put all these like binary codes together. We have to where Technical Boy is kind of just talking about like how he's made much more of a difference than Argus ever did and this and that like it kind of feels like Technical Boy is trying to Like he's just really trying to say like how like he's kind of like filling up his portfolio, or he's kind of like he's boasting around about how he's made a difference in the world, and like he's really desperately trying to cling at every little accomplishment that he's ever done to ultimately have him seem like, yeah, like look at how grandiose that I've been. Look at how many accomplishing things that I've made. Look at all the like I made telephone towers, and I've made cell phones, and I've made this, and I've made that. Look at all the things that I've done. To where ultimately we have Mr. World going on into seeing this CEO and giving him this new technology, and this CEO reveling in this new technology, and ultimately telling Mr. World, it's like, you know why you're kind of like talking about all the accomplishments and all the things that you've ever done? It's just because of the fact that you have become very obsolete. Like you have just become irrelevant to me. And so we have it to where even technical boys noticing how uh, giving this new technology to this CEO that ultimately was his best friend, and ultimately this CEO had brought him to God, and this and that, and Mr. World is like, yeah, I don't think he's listening to you. I don't think he needs to hear you anymore. Um, So we have it to where this CEO has all this new technology that he's so happy about and proud about, and we have Technical Boy who is running off into utter obscurity because reasonably, again, Mr. World is basically telling him how irrelevant he is. So that basically means that Technical Boy is probably going to go bye bye and gone forever to what? Probably be having him be like, okay, we're going to have new Technical Boy. Good God, I swear, if uh, they probably, one, they're going to either kill Technical Boy off, or ultimately, two, he's going to come back and he's probably going to help out the old gods. If they just kill off Technical Boy and then ultimately, like, as long as they don't make a new Technical Boy, I will be fine. But if they just introduce some other characters, like, oh, he's a new Technical Boy, like they did New Media, I'm like, no, that's garbage. I hate that. Um, like, Recently, I think it would just be interesting if Technical Boy joined the side of the old gods, uh, because ultimately Mr. World is just like, dude, I don't need you anymore. I don't need you. Goodbye. Goodbye. Like in an old dial-up computers, also were like goodbye when you would leave. Um, like it was just kind of funny enough when they ultimately killed Argus, because Argus had the weird dial-up tones, which I thought was hilarious. To just tell us that like Argus has like an old technological sound. So going back into the kerfuffle of the god of money. So we ultimately have Mr. World, who is making his way through this company. Uh, we ultimately had New Media, who when Technical Boy was just kind of like just going through the CEO's company and just kind of like stalking around to ultimately just see like what they were gonna come up with. Uh, we had New Media who was texting him and ultimately saying like, "Oh yeah, like you should be worried. Like Mr. World is gonna come after you," and and having pig faces and whatever crap. I was like, "Oh, so we're cutting costs by not having a character present, by having them just do this through text." One, you should have the text floating up in the air so everyone could easily see in big fat print, like the movie. I don't know. Gee golly, I don't know. The Liam Neeson movie where ultimately he's on the plane and you could see the text in the air instead of you having to zoom in on a phone, which you could barely see the writing for, and you would have to hit pause to ultimately see the writing. What garbage is that? It's the upsettingness of like, dude, have it on the screen. Big fat letters on the screen. Big fat juicy succulent letters. Like you could have had it like on the wall somewhere easily. Because we had it to where new media is ultimately plastered on the wall, ultimately saying you're only good as your last win, and ultimately we have Technical Boy that's just kind of giving the finger to new media because ultimately he's just getting annoyed with her. So pushing on. So we have a tour. Mr. World is making his way through this company, through this office, and ultimately he is seeing the Girl Scout cookies. You want some cookies? And ultimately he's like, I don't think I want to pay any money for cookies today. Then he's looking at the symbols on the Girl Scouts uh, clothes, and he's just like, oh, well, maybe I should just go ahead and start talking to the god of money, because evidently Mr. Wednesday is. So we have it to where Mr. Wednesday is trying to gain access to the god of money, and Mr. World makes his way there. And we have it to where ultimately there is a guy that is in this restaurant who is ultimately saying, I'd like to pay up now. I'd like to pay up now. And that seems to be the god of money. So uh, we have both Mr. World and uh, Odin there, and reasonably, like Mr. World is saying, like, hey man, like, dude, we've gotten you beat now. Like, this guy is gonna come on our side because when looking at it, like, we have credit now. We have lines of credit now. Uh, we have banks that aren't even physically in a location. Like, man, like we've had all kinds of technology via money, and reasonably the good old dollar is the good old dinero, the good old coin is no longer relevant. So like what do you have now that ultimately is going to be like a benefit for the god of money? And ultimately Odin is just like, well, Mr. Wednesday is like, well, wars cost money, and so ultimately uh god of money is going to make a lot of profit off of this. And so why, like, yeah, he's going to come on our side just because he knows the winning side. He knows the winning side of things, or he knows who's going to win in the end. So I don't know. I'm like at this point, even though I like Shadow Moon being on the old god side, like I'm just kind of like I would be fine with ultimately Mr. World winning. To be brutally honest. I would honestly be rooting for Mr. I'm honestly rooting for Mr. World's side. I want to see what he's got up his sleeve. And no offense to Odin and all these other gods and whatever, but I want to kind of see what like happens if all these old gods just get snuffed out, to be brutally honest. I want to kind of see what happens when Shadow Moon is all by himself and now he's going to have to go up against the new gods. I would kind of be interested to see that happen, to be brutally honest. Just to be like, to see Shadow on his lonesome again. But that does mean I want to also see like Odin and everybody else die. Like I don't want to see a lot of those characters die. I think that kind of would suck. I don't want to see Bilquist die, and so on and so forth, because she might tie herself into the old gods. So, anyways, so we have it to where Mr. World and we have Mr. Wednesday ultimately talking it out and talking it out with the god of money, and we seem to eventually have it to where that they are having pretty decent arguments, but when looking at it, we have it to where the god of money is just like, you know what, I think I just want to be neutral. Like I think that uh, that reasonably, it's like uh, there's no real value in choosing a side for him, and so ultimately he's just like, you know what, like I'm just gonna remain neutral, and that's my final decision. If anything, you're gonna get no bank from me, from me of this war, and so really that's what just kind of just ends up being the decision that ultimately the god of money is just like, no, like deuces, no, like if anything, yeah, I will probably profit off of this war, but when looking at it, like I'm not going to choose a side. I'm going to be neutral, and that's my final decision. And so it's like, so is every single god they're going to talk to either going to get killed or just going to be like, no, I'm not going to fight for either side? Um, and that's the interesting thing of like, yeah, but is the second half of this going to be re-winning these people back over, or ultimately, like, is Easter and uh, is maybe Santa Claus gonna eventually? Is Saint Nick gonna eventually come on up, all up in here? I'd like to see that, a Santa Claus episode. Shadow Moon saves Santa. That'd be pretty sweet. I'd like to see that episode. I would like that. Would be like, that'd be great. That'd be fun. Shadow Moon saves Santa. Um, but yeah, uh, with this show, yeah, it's just kind of like, okay, every single character is neutral, and ultimately, it's just like they have to take so much time to kind of just weigh the pros and cons, and like, so it's like, oh, so that's what's going to milk it out, just the deciding factor of things. You can't just say, oh, well, this person is choosing a side, because we have that, like, that journey onto the carousel, which I thought was bizarre, and ultimately I don't think I talked about in that early review that ultimately that journey of the carousel, which I thought was weird. And you have it to where Shadow Moon is just kind of like holding on, and like, and Mr. Wednesday and everybody else is like on an acid trip. We're like, ah! It's like freaking weird. And that was to get together all the gods, and ultimately they had Ibris, who was going to, or like Mr. Nancy was asking, like, "Hey man, like, why weren't you on that carousel? Like, you're old as f. Like, come on, like why weren't you on that carousel?" Because Ibris is just like, "Dude, I'm gonna stay neutral." So is the god of death, Anubis. He's gonna stay natural, neutral, and yeah, uh, because I think realistically, like with this war, I think God of Death is gonna have to be neutral. Because what is he gonna like? Oh no, like certain people can't die. Anubis is gonna have to be neutral. I think they're not gonna. They're not even gonna go into asking the God of Death to be like on his side. That would seem weird. Um, but I guess Iris is uh, Ibris is on deck, I guess, to eventually go somewhere. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say for these episodes. I think every episode is kind of like it's getting interesting, like which god they choose to come after next, or which god they decide to like try to like weigh the pros and cons of their being on so and so side. I'm just thinking that I'm possibly thinking that Mr. World is going to win in the end. I think reasonably with all the interesting things that they got going on for them in just trying to get all these gods together and whatever. I think that reasonably, like, I think Mr. World is going to eventually just outgun them somehow. Because it seems that everybody is more interested in Mr. God. I think a lot of people are, or Mr. God. Mr. World, I think a lot of people are more interested in Mr. World, and I think a lot of people are easily swayed by Mr. World. It was interesting for Mr. World to ultimately mention that he's not Mr. Wednesday's enemy. So I'm like, so who is? And ultimately, it was kind of interesting how like Mr. God was, or Mr. God, Mr. World was mentioning how like he would like to much more be feared than anything else, because I think that makes a lot of sense to ultimately just like, well, like I don't want people to respect me and like me and to uh like winning people over isn't like winning people over isn't going to keep them in your pocket forever. Like to have them like fear you and be able to just like, well, I guess I should have to go onto this side because I know he's going to win every single time. Yeah, that's I guess that's much more of a threat than anything. But anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.